It's 19 minutes before 7, and next interview I start with a quote. Now, we challenge Anglo American companies Impala Platinum and Sibanye-Stillwater to do the right thing and to contribute to abating the spread of COVID-19. But the industry is bucking this trend. Why? Is it because black lives don't matter? The Department of Mineral Resources and Energy should protect the human rights of workers and mining communities, with industry respecting the human rights of both, end quote. These the words of John Capel, the Executive Director of the Benchmarks Foundation. Now, the organization says that most mine workers live mainly in densely populated informal settlements, and though minerals make up 45% of South Africa's exports, the sector only contributes 7% to our GDP, making it less of an emergency under the COVID-19 crisis. And that reopening these mines would just cause a surplus to the global market and also lead to a free fall in prices. Benchmarks Foundation's lead researcher, David van Wyk, joins us now via Skype. David, good morning. Thanks for speaking to us once again here on Morning Live.
Good morning, Sakina, and thank you for having us.
So before we get into an actual discussion about COVID-19, there seems to be quite a bit confusion around this lockdown, especially when we talk about non-essential business. Now, first off, the mining industry explains the necessity of maintenance to the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, and then we hear 50% back to work agreement is announced, and miners are confused as to when they're supposed to go back, who's supposed to get the paperwork into order, how's it supposed to get back to them. And of course, we see the CEO of Impala Platinum on Friday arrested for instructing workers to return. So does the Benchmark Foundation understand exactly what is going on here?
Well, I think that there's a great deal of confusion going on at the moment, because at the start of the lockdown, many of the workers got onto taxis and went off to the Eastern Cape, where the labour sending area is. Now, for them to come back for a 50% ramp up of the mines again means that they have to travel all the way from the Eastern Cape back to the informal settlements where they are staying when they are working at the mines themselves. So that in itself is going to be problematic. That transportation of people from the Eastern Cape to the Northwest and to Limpopo and so on is going to be hugely problematic logistically. The second thing is that there will be a week-long induction period in which the workers will be inducted into mining, as they always do when they come back from their Christmas holidays and so on as well. And there will be a medical screening as well. Now, the problem that we are having with the medical screening is that once the mine is fully functional at a 50% in production, you're going to have to screen those workers almost on a daily basis to make sure that they don't bring COVID-19 into the mine. Now, the screening itself is problematic because some people are asymptomatic even though they are positive. They don't show it. Now, if we look at what happened in the 1918 Spanish flu, Kimberley was almost wiped out as a time during that flu because they didn't lock down, and the flu virus at that time went into the mine compounds. Now, the informal settlements are actually even worse than mine compounds because of the densely packed population there, the lack of access to adequate water, sanitation, and other facilities. And usually when a mine operates like the mines at Marikana, then an informal settlement like Nakane doesn't have any water until 12 o'clock at night because the pressure of the water is taken up by the mining operation itself. So it affects the community as well. As soon as you restart the mine, then the water supply to the community is going to be affected.
And then looking at some of the arguments that are put forward, David, as your own organization says, if minerals only contribute 7% towards our GDP, why then is there an exception made in this industry?
Well, we are concerned about the fact that an exception is being made in this industry because we have regulations with regard to this disaster that says that you cannot gather more than 100 people at a time. Now, if you're going to take workers down for a shift, a typical shift would be 2,000 plus people, maybe 3,000, 4,000 people. In the Marikana mines, for example, you've got 30,000 people operating in those shafts. Now, how are you going to practice social distancing in the cages going down? How are you going to practice social distancing in the cages coming up? How are you going to practice social distancing in the transport to and from the informal settlements? How are you going to practice social distancing in the work teams underground, which very often takes place in very, very concentrated spaces?
Now, David, the minister, in making that announcement, did give some reasons. He cited seismic shifts and things like that, rockfalls, as one of the reasons why it was necessary for the mines to actually return to at least 50% operating capacity so that they could maintain the viability of those mines, firstly. So what is your response to that?
Well, the mines were put under care and maintenance at the start of the COVID-19 outbreak. And care and maintenance means that you keep a skeleton staff exactly to do that sort of maintenance. 50% production is not maintenance, it's production. It's ramping up the mine itself. Now, if we look at the COVID-19 targets for the country, we should keep COVID-19 infections below 90 a day. And we see that we've actually managed to do that between the 29th of March and the 15th of April. And then after this announcement, and I don't say this is because of this announcement, but after this announcement, the number of infections shot up to 251 per day. Now, with the actual reopening of these mines, this figure could actually treble or go even higher than that. And this is not what we want, because this is going to extend the lockdown, and it's going to actually make it very difficult for us to flatten the curve, which is what we should be doing if we don't want our health services to be overwhelmed.
Now, David, just that figure that you quote of 251 positive cases per day, can you just give us the source for that? Is that an average, or are those the figures that have been coming through?
Those are the figures that came through from the latest information from the government itself for the 17th of April. And, that is highly concerning, because we actually had a plateau between the 29th of March and around about the 15th of April. And now suddenly we're going to undo all those gains that we made with regard to controlling this virus.
Right. So you say this is not about a maintenance and just making sure that everything is functional in the mines, but it's actually about ramping up production. But then when it comes to what is essential and what is not in the mining sector, can we have a talk about that? Because we're told, or at least if we think about something like coal, where Eskom needs to be kept going, we need to keep the lights on, etc., as opposed to perhaps mining iron ore. What's essential and what isn't?
Well, I think that what is important is that most coal mining is open cost mining, and it's not labor intensive coal mining. You have drivers and you've got a grader driver and so on. Most coal mine operations don't have more than 300 workers. However, platinum mining and gold mining, which is deep level mining, you have thousands of workers going down every day. In fact, we are looking at almost 400,000 workers in this particular industry. Now, if you're ramping up by 50%, it means that you're going to take 200,000 workers in and out of the mines on a daily basis, and that for me is hugely problematic, because platinum, there's a glut in the global platinum market. The platinum price can't get beyond the $800 an ounce level. It's not been able to do that since the financial crisis of 2009. And we could see with the 2014 mine workers strike that the strike went on for more than 6 months, and the price never actually improved because because of the glut on the platinum market. Platinum was sold from stockpiles in Switzerland. Those stockpiles continue to exist now, and there is actually no demand for platinum at the moment. In fact, there's very little demand for any mineral commodities, because all production has come to a standstill globally, especially in the car industry, because of COVID-19. So who are you going to sell this platinum to that you're going to be extracting?
But David, the South African industry says that it has suffered great losses, as one can imagine, and that it actually needs to resume mining if it wants to survive. In other words, if mining collapses, then we'll have an even greater jobs bloodbath. What's your response to that?
Well, I think that is actually not accurate. The costs of mining at the moment are very low because the mines are actually on care and maintenance. They're not spending much money being on care and maintenance. They've got surplus stock globally of these particular minerals and so on that they could be selling off at the moment and maintain themselves. We must also remember that they pay their costs in rand and they sell their product in dollars and euros and pounds. And that makes for a huge big difference between the two. The cost of maintaining an operational mine is not very high. Getting it back into production would also not actually be all that expensive as they say it would be. We're going to have a jobs bloodbath anyways if we flood the global market with commodities for which there is no market and they don't get sold and the platinum price collapses completely.
And then initially, of course, there wasn't expected to be any work on those mines, and then it, of course, changed. What do you think necessitated the regulation to be amended?
I think it's pressure from the mining council, and this kind of pressure also was asserted in the 1918 Spanish flu outbreak in South Africa, in which 300,000 people died, and many of those people who died were actually mine workers living in mine compounds at that time. I don't know why we don't want to learn from history. I think that we should take a bit of pain now so that we could have a lot of gain at the end of the day when we go back to full production with a healthy labor force and safe working conditions. We can't put profits before people.
But what about the unions? Because one would imagine that would be one of their first and foremost concerns. And the unions at this point seem to be open to the idea, given, albeit that they want strict guidelines to be adhered to, including the involvement of the Department of Labour and inspectors to advise on the process. But it's difficult enough to keep mining safe, let alone also to keep it sanitized. So what do you make of the union's position in this regard?
Well, yes, I think that sanitizing mines is almost impossible. Most mines use brown water in the percussion drills that they use underground. So the drill operators are constantly sprayed by brown water as it is. So the conditions of sanity in mines. Of sanitization in mines is hugely problematic. It's a very difficult thing to do. How are you going to keep those surfaces, which the workers will be constantly touching and so on, clean? How are you going to make sure that under those very hot conditions, workers actually wear masks and so on, which they don't do at the moment? Workers take off their protective gear because of the incredible heat that they have to work under when they are underground. Of course, when they come up in the evenings, they come up into the cold winter air, and the issue of pneumonia has been a problem on South African mines for since the beginning of mining in this country, in fact, and this is just going to aggravate that particular situation. So it is the union positions. They have complained about this reopening. NUM has complained about it. They banged heads with the minister on Friday, and AMCU has said that they will take the department to court should workers become ill. So they have asked for. What are the guidelines to the mines to ensure that this virus is not going to spread? And I don't think those guidelines will actually prevent it. I would love to see the guidelines myself.
Okay, so you're not convinced by those guidelines. So let's talk about the miners themselves and exactly why you as Benchmarks Foundation believe that even 50% of the workforce returning will cause a catastrophic increase in infection. How? Why?
Well, the reason being workers living on the living out allowance have all moved into informal settlements. Most mines in South Africa are surrounded by informal settlements where these workers are actually residing in zinc shacks and so on. The conditions in those informal settlements are far from decent labor conditions for workers, and have in our past studies we have shown that they have compromised mine health and safety exactly because of the living conditions under which the workers are working. When workers report for work, they are usually given a breathalyzer test, because the only form of entertainment in informal settlements is in fact alcohol. Now, are we going to pursue the breathalyzer tests? And if the breathalyzer tests are not pursued, the breathalyzers themselves will actually spread this virus. Are they going to allow drunk workers to go down underground and compromise the safety of workers when they are underground? How are they going to determine whether a worker was drinking the previous night or not? That's one of the concerns that we are having. The other concern that we are having is that workers are mostly malnourished when they live in these informal settlements. They go underground, interviews with workers. They tell us that I take 2 slices of bread and a piece of bologna in the morning before I go on shift. And then the guy works an 8-hour shift on that nutrition that he's getting there. So clearly, the workers' immune systems and so on are compromised by the status of their nutrition as well. Are the mines going to supplement the nutrition of these workers when they are underground as well? I don't think so. And of course, the supervision underground. What kind of supervision is there going to be underground to make sure that there is social distancing and so on? In situations where some work tasks require that workers are clustered together in large groups at the rock face in order to be able to move the rock and so on during the shift and to be able to meet the target set by the mine for productivity.
And just finally, David, given all the research done, is there a possible compromise that could be made here?
Well, for me, the issue of workers' lives and so on is far more important than production at this particular stage. Because if you have a spike in COVID-19 on the mines and in these mining communities and so on, productivity itself is going to collapse anyways. Because you will have created conditions which will be impossible to sustain production if you have a mass outbreak of this particular virus in mining communities and amongst mine workers themselves. What are you going to do in that particular situation? The only compromise that we can have is to actually abide by the rules of the lockdown and of the state of disaster that has been declared.
Well, David van Wyk, thanks so much for your time this morning. David is the lead researcher at Benchmarks Foundation, cautioning against the recall of miners to go back to work underground amid the COVID-19 crisis. Let's take a quick break before we bring you your news at 7.